You know what? That's the key question right now. Let's deal with what the jobs minister said, and this comes as a relief to many travelers. She had said that, look, the two sides, the Flight Attendants Union and Air Canada, too far apart to really negotiate this in time. And remember, she pointed to Canada's vulnerable economy, and it puts into stark focus the trade war that's currently going on with the United States.
As Minister of Labour, I have exercised my authorities under Section 107 of the Canadian Labour Code to direct the Canada Industrial Relations Board to order the parties to resume and continue their operations and duties in order to secure industrial peace and protect the interests of Canada, Canadians, and the economy.
The announcement that shook Ottawa. So something just detonated in Canadian politics, and it's the kind of blast you can hear from Vancouver to St. John's. The Western provinces didn't just talk about Wexit this time. They dropped an announcement so big, Ottawa's still trying to pick its jaw up off the floor. And when I say big, I mean impossible big. Like, this can't be happening big. And yet, here we are. Global News is reporting that Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba have jointly declared their intent to move forward with a coordinated independence referendum.
We're going to continue to work hard through to Monday, and the people of Battle River Crowfoot are going to decide whether they want strong national leadership for the local issues that affect their lives.
All at the same time, in the exact same week. And not in some distant theoretical future. They've set the target for spring 2026, which in political time is basically tomorrow. The moment it went public.
The issue that we have is that we've had a disrespectful Ottawa. We've had an Ottawa for 10 years. For some reason, they decided they didn't want conservative voices and didn't want conservative viewers.
It happened in Edmonton at what was supposed to be a routine Western Premiers Conference. The media was expecting the usual gripes about pipelines, maybe some chatter about carbon tax. Instead, Danielle Smith steps up to the podium and says, "The people of Alberta will have their say on whether we remain in this federation, and we will not be standing alone."
The federal government often disrespects provincial jurisdiction. Quebec has been one of the consistent voices in pushing back on that. But Alberta's now at a size, with the development of our economy, with the wealth that we have, where I think that we've got to push back as well, and that's what we're doing.
Q. Scott Moe from Saskatchewan. We're done waiting for Ottawa to change. It's time to decide if we want to build our own future. Then Manitoba's premier, normally the diplomat, drops the hammer. We will hold our own vote, and we will do it alongside our neighbors. That's it. That's the triple shot announcement no one in Ottawa thought they'd ever hear. Ottawa's instant meltdown.
This isn't just about Wexit or the very possible secession of Western Canada from Ottawa. This is about a very real political phenomenon that's toppled governments throughout history.
The response from the capital? Pure panic. Within hours, ministers were on every TV and radio station warning of national collapse and irreparable damage to unity.
I take the position that our confederation is functioning exactly the way it was intended to do, and that is that Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, basically the West, were always intended to be the colonial serfs and the colonial servants of Ontario and Quebec.
Press releases flew out of the PMO like confetti, each one more desperate than the last. And of course, Trudeau did the usual word salad routine. Shared values, working together, listening to concerns, but without a single concrete policy shift. If anything, it made things worse. Why this is different?
It would cost anywhere from $10 to $20 billion to get built. And to make the economic case for that, having more egress with more barrels to be sold to Asia is the way to pay for it. If we had a 1 million barrel a day pipeline going to the Northwest BC coast, that would generate about $20 billion a year in revenue.
I described him today as Santa Claus. He's coming, and his sled was full of all sorts of stuff. Now he's taking off back to the North Pole. He's going to sort it out, and then he's going to call it.
See, Ottawa's used to dealing with Alberta acting up, maybe even Saskatchewan making noise. But all three prairie provinces coordinating like this, that's new. That's dangerous for Ottawa. Because if one goes, the others are right there behind them. And it's not just a chain reaction, it's a political earthquake. The numbers are already scary for the feds. Alberta, 42% support independence right now. Saskatchewan, 35%. Manitoba just hit 28%, up from 17% last year. Those aren't fringe numbers anymore. That's a movement. Media in full spin mode. CBC's panels were stacked within hours. Unity experts warning about foreign interference and American influence as if the prairies are just rogue U.S. states in waiting. The Globe ran an editorial calling it a dangerous fantasy. The Toronto Star went straight for the scare tactic. The end of Canada? But here's the problem. Out west, those headlines don't scare people. They make them nod. They've heard the "you'll regret it" speech for decades while watching Ottawa siphon billions in equalization and kill energy projects in court. The impossible part. Here's why Ottawa calls it impossible. Because the legal and political logistics are insane. Holding 3 separate sovereignty referendums at the same time, coordinating the question wording, the campaigns, the timelines, that's never been done before in Canadian history. But that's exactly why the West is doing it. It's not just a vote, it's a show of force. It's telling Ottawa, this isn't one province you can ignore. This is a block. The stakes. If all 3 provinces vote yes, and they just might, Canada instantly loses 35% of its exports, 40% of its energy production. Billions in agricultural exports, $17 billion a year in equalization revenue. It's not just an economic hit, it's a body blow to the entire federation. And why it matters now.
As far as we're concerned, we want trade unionists to vote for independence. We want members of the NDP to vote for independence.
The West isn't bluffing anymore. This isn't a protest rally. This is binding political machinery in motion. They've got the legal framework, the public support, and now the timeline. And Ottawa, they've got a countdown clock ticking in the background of every press conference.
We exist solely as a colony, a resource colony, if you will, for Ottawa.
We'll go inside the Western Premier's closed-door strategy session, the Wexit war room that planned this announcement, and how Ottawa insiders are describing it as Quebec 95, but bigger. Inside the Wexit war room.
Alberta is moving forward with an independence referendum for 2026.
So you've heard the announcement. 3 prairie provinces, 1 coordinated plan, a 2026 referendum date locked in. The East is calling it impossible, Ottawa's calling it dangerous, and the West, they're calling it just the beginning. But how did we even get here? Because you don't wake up on a Monday and decide to break up the country by Tuesday. This took planning, months of it. And as it turns out, they had a name for it, the Wexit War Room. The Calgary meeting no one was supposed to know about. It started last fall. The premiers of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, plus a handful of trusted advisors, quietly met in Calgary. No press releases, no social media photos. The official cover story, economic strategy discussions. The real agenda, how to coordinate a triple-shot sovereignty push without Ottawa catching on until it was too late. According to a leaked briefing from a Saskatchewan cabinet session, the 3 premiers agreed on 3 core principles that night. 1. The referendum question wording would be identical across all provinces. 2. The votes would be held in the same week to maximize political shock. 3. The campaigns would share resources, messaging, and data. If you think that sounds like a political heist movie plot, you're not wrong. Bill 54, the political nitroglycerin.
Without Alberta, the federal government in Ottawa would face a near $20 billion shortfall every single year. Alberta is the golden goose of the Great White North.
The real accelerant here, Alberta's Bill 54. Passed quietly earlier this year, it slashed the required number of signatures to trigger a referendum from 600,000 to just 177,000. That's less than the number of people who show up to complain about gas prices on Facebook in a weekend. For separatist organizers, this was the equivalent of handing them a Formula One car and saying, "Go nuts." The Alberta Prosperity Project immediately began mapping out signature drives, while Saskatchewan First and Manitoba's Independence Caucus started drafting their own equivalent legislation. Ottawa's leak problem.
So the math is absolutely devastating for Eastern Canada.
We exist solely as a colony, a resource colony, if you will, for Ottawa.
Here's where it gets interesting. Ottawa didn't find out about the war room until weeks before the announcement, and only because of a leak. According to a PMO insider, the reaction was pure disbelief. An internal memo from the clerk of the Privy Council reportedly warned, coordinated provincial referendums on sovereignty represent the largest constitutional threat since the 1995 Quebec referendum. The combined economic impact of prairie secession would exceed $200 billion annually. Think about that. They're already doing the math, and it's ugly. The Quebec wildcard.
Populist dimension of Western alienation, it can't be ignored, it has to be.
And here's where Ottawa's nightmare multiplies. Within 24 hours of the announcement, Parti Québécois leader Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon congratulated the Prairie Premiers on exercising the right to self-determination. Yes, you heard that right. Quebec separatists are cheering for Wexit. Why? Because if the West proves it's possible to leave, Quebec's third referendum becomes a question of when, not if. And that's two separate sovereignty crises at once. The media blitz that flopped.
Brewing between Ottawa and BC Premier David Eby. It was kicked off on Monday when the Prime Minister announced $750 million to help Quebec deal with
Ottawa's first move was textbook. Flood the media with unity voices warning about economic chaos and the dangers of breaking up Canada. CBC panels featured academics talking about the irresponsibility of the Prairie Premiers. The Globe and Mail ran op-eds titled Canada's Impossible Choice. But here's the problem. People out west have heard this for decades. They were told leaving would be impossible in the 80s during the NEP, impossible in the 2000s and 10s when pipelines got killed in court, impossible when carbon taxes got slapped on their industries, and yet the status quo keeps hurting them. The fear card just doesn't work anymore. The American angle. Meanwhile, Washington's interest is growing by the day. A U.S. congressional aide told Bloomberg that a sovereign prairie bloc would be an economic partner of immediate strategic value. Translation, the Americans like what they see. Why wouldn't they? Alberta's oil, Saskatchewan's potash, Manitoba's hydro, all of it already flows south. The infrastructure is in place, and unlike Ottawa, Washington wouldn't block pipelines out of spite. The blockade problem.
Police in Canada continued their crackdown on the Freedom Convoy protests, with officers in riot gear taking to the streets to clear the blockade, even as truckers remain defiant and accuse the administration of being heavy-handed.
One thing Ottawa is already gaming out: border control. If the prairies vote yes, the feds could try to slow walk recognition or even block access to federal infrastructure. But prairie leaders have already hinted they'd strike interim trade deals with the U.S. within weeks of a yes vote. In other words, they're ready for Ottawa to play hardball. Power of a bloc. And here's why this is such a problem for Ottawa. One province threatening to leave is a crisis. Three threatening at once is an existential collapse. The West isn't just Alberta anymore. It's a coordinated bloc representing 6.5 million people, 40% of Canada's energy production, and over a third of its export economy. Even if one province blinks, the other two can carry the momentum. And that's what makes this impossible plan suddenly look possible. We'll break down the triple Wexit scenario from day one after a yes vote to the long-term ripple effects that could shatter Canada's political map forever. The triple Wexit scenario. All right, let's fast forward to spring 2026. The votes have been held. Alberta says yes. Saskatchewan says yes. Manitoba says yes. Three provinces, one seismic decision. They're leaving the Canadian Federation. And overnight, Canada changes forever. Ottawa in crisis mode.
Both provinces, in their own unique ways, are watching their resource wealth and their cultural identity get steamrolled by federal policies that benefit Toronto and Montreal.
The second those results come in, the Canadian dollar nosedives. Credit agencies slap the country with a downgrade. Ottawa holds an emergency cabinet meeting, the kind where everyone knows there are no good options. Equalization payments, gone. That's $17 billion a year Ottawa suddenly can't hand out to the other provinces. Quebec's annual $13 billion check bounces before it even leaves the printer. The Maritimes face instant budget holes they can't fill, and all of this hits before the prairies even officially leave. Just the vote itself is enough to spook investors and grind the federal government's agenda to a halt. The Prairie Bloc's opening hand. While Ottawa's scrambling, the new Prairie Bloc isn't sitting still. Alberta controls 4.2 million barrels of oil per day. Saskatchewan's potash mines feed global agriculture. Manitoba's hydro lines are already plugged into U.S. grids. The premiers hold their first Western Sovereignty Summit in Regina, where they announce a joint transition plan, temporary trade agreements with the U.S. to keep goods moving, a shared resource revenue pool to stabilize the new bloc's finances, a fast-track policy for recognizing foreign investment projects stalled by Ottawa in the past. In other words, they're acting like a functioning nation before they've even signed the paperwork. Independence or integration? The big question now is whether the bloc goes fully independent or takes the shortcut, U.S. statehood. Option 1, independence. They get total control, their own currency, their own central bank, their own trade policy, but it's also the heavy lift. Building a defense force, setting up embassies, negotiating dozens of treaties from scratch. Option 2, U.S. statehood. It's plug and play. Keep the Canadian provincial borders, but they become states 51, 52, and 53. Instant access to U.S. military protection, the U.S. dollar, and all existing trade agreements. The downside? Washington's in charge of foreign policy. Right now, polls show about 20% of Albertans and 18% of Saskatchewanians would back U.S. statehood outright, with higher support in rural areas. Those numbers could skyrocket if independence gets messy. The NATO and Arctic shift.
In the West, this is about a lot more than just, say, hurt feelings or political resentment or feeling of being ignored. We've talked about this before, but there's some dollar signs.
If the bloc joins the U.S., NATO's entire Arctic strategy changes overnight. America gains a massive new Arctic coastline stretching from Alaska across the top of the prairies to Hudson Bay. That means new naval patrol routes, expanded early warning radar coverage, control over strategic shipping lanes as ice melts. Ottawa wouldn't just lose land, it would lose its northern defense leverage, possibly forever. The domino effect. It doesn't stop with the prairies. Northern British Columbia, already tied economically to Alberta through oil and gas, could vote to join the bloc. The Yukon and Northwest Territories might follow the money if Ottawa's ability to fund them collapses. And then there's Quebec. Watching the West walk away and keep its economy intact could be the spark for Quebec's third referendum. Remember, in 1995, they came within 1.2% of leaving. This time, the yes side would have a fresh example to point to. Ottawa's options shrink. What could Ottawa do at this point? The menu is short. Fight it in court, which could drag for years and look like an attack on democracy. Negotiate a new confederation deal. But now it's the bloc holding all the leverage. Accept the split and pray it stops at 3 provinces. None of these are good. All of them are historic. The final countdown.
We're going to make Alberta great again, and that is when we cut ourselves off from the leech that is Eastern Canada.
Make no mistake, Canada's in uncharted territory. The triple referendum clock is ticking, and every federal misstep just pushes the yes numbers higher. If nothing changes, we could be 24 months away from a Canada without its energy heartland, without its agricultural backbone, without the prairies at all. Ottawa can call it impossible all at once, but the West just made it official they're ready to try. And that might be all it takes.